Theodore J. Flicker.
You have to take a step back if you're dealing with Theodore J. Flicker. I never found out what the J was, didn't care.
I don't know what the J stands for either.
He owned a theater in New York.
It was the first truly improvisational theater in New York.
He created the hit TV show Barney Miller.
Barney, it's your wife.
Ask her to call back, will you?
And was a Hollywood director.
Nobody had done political satire in this country for 30 years. We were relentless about expressing our opinions.
He's got a suitcase full of pot.
Produced edgy Broadway plays.
I hope the fuzz don't bust the cat.
I'll have the robe, please.
Did sculptures of nude women.
A live model, a live nude model.
He had a very, very hard time dealing with the establishment for a long time.
A troublemaker.
They used to call me the Kingmaker. Shortly after I told anybody to go f themselves, they were on the cover of Time magazine and the new head of the studio. People were lining up to insult me.
He made a movie that got him into trouble with J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI.
For putting me on. The President of the United States.
The LA office of the FBI got a copy of the script. We didn't send it to him. I was playing Jiminy Cricket in the school production of Pinocchio. And when I said my first speech, they applauded, and I was hooked. My expectation was modest. I expected to be the American Laurence Olivier.
Most men with long careers have a den in which to keep their memorabilia, but not Ted Flicker. His garage is where he keeps the reminders of his past.
My theater in New York, The Premise. This is the very original cast of The Premise. Joan Darling, Tom Aldridge, George Siegel, and me.
We really felt completely as equals in the company, and that's a huge tribute to Ted, that all of us felt like it was our company, and if we didn't agree, we just kept working, whether we worked till 4 in the morning, until we came upon a solution that all of us agreed upon and was excited about doing.
But it was always one adventure after another, one discovery after another.
He was running our show, designing it, the lighting, all of that stuff.
Ted has always acted the impresario.
Plus, he was running a going coffee house. That's a lot of stuff to do.
Oh, he ran it all. He was making the coffee, he was back in the kitchen.
It's good he's doing all that thinking. I'll wash up.
I found acting in The Premise the highest experience of myself, of any other work that I've done in the theater. Ted got this idea that he wanted to do an integrated show with black and white actors, improvising from the point of view of the black actors. He rounded up an incredible cast: Godfrey Cambridge, Diana Sands, and Al Freeman Jr.
The New York Times refused to print my ad, which was The Premise in living color. We opened a theater in Washington that was great fun.
The Washington premiere was filled with all of the Kennedy White House people.
Senator Fulbright.
Lyndon Johnson was there.
Ben Bradley.
Senator Eastland and Hubert Humphrey, and oh, I can't count them all. I still remember a scene we did with Ted. We asked for a suggestion of a place. The place was Pennsylvania Avenue. Someone's there standing in front of the White House. So Ted and I looked at each other and thought for a moment, stared at the White House. And I said, "Do you think it's possible for Nixon to become president?" Ted said, "Nixon? He could no more become president than we could be attacked by Indians." That was the scene, and it was blackout.
Maybe I shouldn't be doing theater. Maybe I should make a movie.
The story I am about to tell you happened a short time ago. The events within that story changed many lives.
So Buck Henry and I came out to Palm Springs in California and rented a house.
It was a very quiet domestic life. I'm sure a number of people thought we were married.
And we sat there for 6 or 8 weeks and wrote the script for a film called The Troublemaker.
We went out and shot it, and I'm trying to think if any of us had made a movie before. It was the first time I'd acted on camera.
I dreamt that there was this big hole in my bedroom floor, and all these men kept coming in the room and falling in the hole.
It was a total labor of love. It's one of my more proud pieces of work, especially when I see my old body on film. That really cheers me up.
Then Mr. Kelly fell into the hole in the floor. How did you know?
Isn't that incredible?
An improvised adventure. Ted again making do, finding a way of filming scenes that couldn't be done because we didn't have the money to do it.
Now that's what I like about being a lawyer. Giving people your expert advice and having them very carefully ignore it.
It was fun to do. I had no idea whether it was going to be any good or not.
I would suggest that we set fire to his establishment, but unfortunately the whole district is a fire trap.
I rarely am so immodest as to quote my good reviews, but this is too hot. This French critic said that The Troublemaker was a combination of Brecht, Voltaire, and the Marx Brothers. I later figured out he must have been the guy who started the Jerry Lewis craze in France. The picture was a pretty good picture. Did well.
Ted was a successful bachelor living in the fast lane of the Hollywood social scene. Then George Peppard and Elizabeth Ashley invited him to their wedding.
We get to the wedding, and there's this woman. And I want her. I mean, I really want her. And I don't even get to learn the woman's name. The next day, I'm in Beverly Hills, and I park in front of a toy store. Coming out of the frame shop next door is that woman. And I go, "Hi." And she gives me a big smile. I jump out of the car, and she tells me her name, and I tell her my name. I grill steaks, then open a bottle of champagne. Comes dinner time. Here comes Barbara Perkins in her Corvair, and we start talking. And we walk on the beach at night. Pretty soon, we're talking about when, not if, when we get married. We agree that we will start living together on Saturday, and this is Wednesday. So, come Saturday, here she comes with 2 bags full of groceries, and we start living together. Then began the truly happiest time in both our lives. When she came to my beach house for dinner that night, it had nothing to do with the cliches of love at first sight. It simply was. It simply was the only way of being. I knew that this woman was my other half. I was at a party. Jimmy Coburn was there. And so he came over to me and said, "Hey man, you got anything?" I said, "Yeah, I just finished a script." I said, "You want to read it?" He said, "I'll read it tomorrow, send it over." And I sent it over, and he called me that afternoon. And he said, "Man, let's do it."
I ran into Jim one day at Paramount, and I said, "What's up?" He said, "Oh, we're going to do this movie, The President's Analyst." I said, "Well, I want to do it." He said, "Well, I'll introduce you to Ted Flicker. I'll introduce you to the director," that was nameless at the time. So I met Ted, and I showed him something I was doing, and he said, "The Flicker manner, you got it."
For putting me on.
Uh-uh.
The President of the United States?
We only got one.
The FBI got a copy of the script. We didn't send it to him.
Kill him. I want him dead.
The heavy in the script was the head of the FBI, an obvious reference to J. Edgar Hoover. Flicker cast little people to play the director and his agents.
On your shoulders that this great responsibility falls.
If it made Mr. Hoover look bad, they would automatically have a reaction that, hey, well, you really don't want to do this, you know, that type of thing. And they would have gone to a lot of lengths to halt it.
Ted's script was sent to FBI headquarters in Washington. Hoover was not happy.
We went into production. 6 months of preparation, location hunting, casting. Charlie Bluthorn. Charlie owned the studio and a bunch of other companies. Gulf and Western was his big company, and that started out as an automobile parts company.
Paramount Pictures was one of Hollywood's oldest and most successful studios, but in the 1960s, it had fallen on hard times. Bluthorn convinced his board to purchase Paramount in 1966. He then named himself president of the studio. It was his first job in show business. Bluthorn chose Robert Evans to be head of production at Paramount. Evans had been in Hollywood for years, but had never been in studio management before. As a child in Manhattan, Evans dreamed of being a movie star. He became a child and teenage actor in Broadway plays, on the radio, and in the new medium of television. In the mid-1950s, his brother Charles ran the Evan Bacone Dress Company. He hired Robert to help with sales. They were young, handsome, and successful. Two wealthy bachelors eagerly pursuing models and actresses.
1955 in New York was divine. I had a wonderful little apartment right midtown Manhattan with 2 roommates.
Barbara Flicker was a young, single fashion model living in New York in the 1950s.
I think we dated every terrific man in New York in that 2 years. It was really fun. Bob Evans, before you went out on a date with him, if you're like just a model who didn't have a lot of things, they would send over a box of dresses and say, "Wear one tonight." And that was fun. It was a wonderful time.
Then Evans moved to Los Angeles to become the West Coast sales manager of Evan Bacone. He made the Beverly Hills Hotel pool his base of operations. That is where Norma Shearer discovered him. She helped him get parts in a few films.
You tell fortunes?
Sometimes.
Do you mind?
No, I like it. Tell me that I will live for always and I will be a millionaire.
He had never been an executive before. All he had done was to play a bullfighter in one picture.
Bob Evans' acting career was going nowhere, so he tried producing. He started a production company, but it never produced anything. Many stories circulated about how Evans got the Paramount job. Peter Bart worked at the New York Times LA bureau. In 1966, he wrote a feature piece about Robert Evans being Hollywood's hot young producer. Supposedly, Bluthorn read the article and after meeting with Evans, hired him to head production at Paramount.
I don't know this to be true, but it certainly was the word in Hollywood. Everybody told this story, that he was on a plane. He was in the first-class cabin, and sitting next to him was Charlie Bluthorn. And Charlie had just purchased Paramount Pictures. They got to talking, and Charlie was complaining that he could never, ever get a table at Danny's Hideaway. That was a steakhouse on the east side of New York, very fashionable.
The rumor was that gangsters sort of backed it, or owned it, I don't know. But they had fabulous food, and it was a pretty place, and there was a kind of mystery about it.
Also a great place for picking up great-looking hookers.
He was like this really important guy who owned thousands of companies and talked to the president regularly, that just wanted to be around girls.
And he could never meet girls, couldn't get in there. And Bob Evans, who was a genuine New York playboy, said, piece of cake. And he got him into Danny's Hideaway, and Charlie gave him the studio.
But the way Evans tells it these days, it was Sidney Korshak, a Chicago mob-connected labor lawyer and Hollywood fixer who set him up at Paramount. Whatever the real story was, Evans got the job. One of his first hires was Peter Bart to be his number two.
Evans and I were very anxious to get or to break away from the club, the Hollywood club. Too many of the pictures that Paramount and every studio was making had the old school directors and producers.
They reached out to young writers and directors who were in tune with the changing times. Hal Ashby, Roman Polanski, Haskell Wexler, Francis Ford Coppola, and Theodore J. Flicker all had innovative films green-lighted by the new Paramount.
In my first meeting with Bob Evans, I realized that I could be in trouble because this was not a sterling mind, that I wasn't going to get a lot of help from him making the picture. Peter Bart would say to me during the screening of dailies, well, that's not funny. And I would say, how would you know?
I remember a meeting with Ted Flicker in which I said, look, we all know satire doesn't work.
You're telling me that's not funny when I say it's funny?
I mean, satire is a dirty word. That's a four-letter word, not only in Hollywood, but in the entertainment business. If you're a playwright and you want to kill your play, just say, well, this is a great satire.
I had lots of ugly to-dos with them.
Peter Bart, who had no background in film, bad taste, whatever he had, didn't have, he had a lot of comments that nobody wanted to do.
Point by point, how to change the script.
So Ted said, I'm going to go see Charlie Bluthorn. He said, I love the film. And we said, well, you got to tell them. He said, no. He said, I don't get involved. Howard Koch or somebody had a meeting with the FBI. And they said, you can't use the FBI. Ted came back and he said, fuck them. He said, this is a free country. I'm going to do what I want. I said, no, you're not. We're going to change it. You'll see. We changed it. FBR, we call it.
Sullivan, FBR.
FBI, FBR.
Finally, after I turned over my director's cut of the picture, they had security escort me off the lot, and they took the picture away, which they legally could do, and they began recutting it to their taste.
I was talking to Evans the other day. Neither of us remember him being escorted off the lot.
Howard Koch, on the other hand, said, hey, it's Ted's film. He wrote it and directed it, you know, leave him alone.
My dear Mr. Lux, no man is an island. Most of us require the warmth of human companionship.
Poppycock. It certainly seems believable that Hoover would be upset at the portrait of himself portrayed in the movie, and the fact that the FBI portrayed as basically incompetent. It's also not inconceivable that he would have complained to the studio, because that's what people did in those days.
Fortunately, they were too stupid to realize that they should have also fired the editor. And so every time they would take something out, he'd give it a separate number and store it in a special place. And the night before it was to ship to negative cutting, he and I went into the studio and put the picture back to my cut and shipped it.
Took these pieces out and showed it to them. They said, okay, that's fine. And I went back to the cutting room and put it all back together. And in the end, Ted got what he wanted. Today, everyone's got copies. In those days, there was one copy. And they weren't, you know, that was it. So it was a little easier to get your way.
It's not complicated at all.
The head of the FBI was played by an actor named Walter Burke, who was a very diminutive guy who was he played a lot of gunsels and acolytes to evil villains and stuff like that. And he played the part totally straight. He was perfect casting. He's very, very short. And his name in the movie was Henry Lux. And the joke being that Hoover was a vacuum cleaner and Lux was a vacuum cleaner.
I was trying to make a picture of its time. I've been told so often that the President's Analyst is kind of a time capsule of the 60s. The 60s were a crazy, mixed-up time.
You can sleep in my bed.
This picture was different.
Perhaps we might alter the course of history.
It was before its time.
My name is Arlington Hughes. I'm president of TPC.
TPC?
The phone company.
The big villain in my picture was something called TPC, the phone company. An AT&T guy showed up on the set. And we said, how did you get a script? And he said, oh, the studio sent it. Studio was more afraid of the phone company than the FBI.
You will get not one word from me. Oh, I think we will.
Think of the predictions that Ted made 30-some years ago. And yet we still learn that AT&T have these secret little rooms with master computers feeding all of our information to the government.
It was amusing to me that everything that came out of Watergate, basically Ted wrote for the President's Analyst. Whether it's literal or not, it basically was the same thing. The evilness. And I think Watergate did talk about the CIA spying on the FBI and things like that. And it was like a prophecy.
When it was released, the film's reviews and box office were good.
And I'm getting cables from the studio, from the executive producer. Oh boy, we got the biggest hit ever. Is this wonderful? Congratulations. And then I get a phone call, and it's from Charlie Bluthorn. And he said to me, "What the hell have you done to me?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I'm pulling your damn picture out of the theaters." I started to hyperventilate. I said, "Charlie, what are you talking about? We got a hit." He said, "I just got a call from the White House wanting to know how I can make a picture like that." Well, I knew it wasn't the White House. It was Hoover through the White House.
My orders are to kill you.
I said, "But Charlie, this is a hit." And he said, "What the hell do I care about your hit? I got 27 companies do business in Washington." J. Edgar Hoover called the White House, and the White House called Charlie Bluedorn. The shit hit the fan, as they say in the Army. And the picture was pulled.
It would be more believable that Hoover himself would have called the executive at Gulf and Western and said, "Hey, you know, this is a bunch of baloney. You know, this makes fun of the Bureau. It's not good for America. You know, you'd really be doing me a favor if you just pulled it."
It was really scary to think that the government didn't like a movie. I mean, why did they care?
I was no longer on the A list.
People that invited us to these big fancy parties, and all of a sudden they didn't recognize me on the street. And I was just hurt, just really hurt.
In effect, it was a blacklist.
Of one.
When that happened, it was scary to me. And we sort of went together like magnets. I mean, we just got close, close, close.
If you alienate the wrong people, they fix it so you don't work.
And it's happening. It is very uncomfortable. No matter how many times you say, "Oh, it doesn't matter what they think of me," it matters.
The president's analyst showed you what satire could do to you, but you still wanted to stick with it.
Oh, yeah. I had never censored myself before in The Compass or The Premise. It never occurred to me to censor myself. Hoover was a perfect target.
The only incident involving Hoover and the FBI and the picture directly was this one. Bob Evans had just, at the beginning of the President's House, as it was shooting, had just fired his butler. He was about to leave for work, and he was busy, was going to leave for the studio, and two guys in suits show up at the door. And the housekeeper says, "Two people from blah, 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 blah," and Bob didn't understand who they're from. So these two guys come in. Evans assumed that they were interviewing for the butler's job, so he said to them, "Do you want me to interview you together or one by one?" They were sort of thrown by this question. And he started to ask them things like, "What are your housekeeping skills? For whom have you worked in the past?" The two guys from the FBI were so completely baffled at the whole progress of this discussion that they never really got around to the process of trying to intimidate Evans about the president's analyst. And I know that when Bob told me about this, he said, "I had a strange conversation with, I think they were FBI, but they might have been butlers."
Good story, but not true. 2 months after we interviewed Mr. Bart, he published his latest book, Infamous Players, A Tale of Movies, the Mob, and Sex. In it, he tells a completely different version of the Butler story. 2 men in dark suits pulled up to his house. They say Mr. Hoover sent them, the housekeeper announced. Since Evans employed an agency to hire a new butler, he assumed they were candidates for the job and had been sent by the Hoover agency. He sent for them and started to question them on their experience. The men quickly clarified their mission. The Hoover was J. Edgar Hoover, and they were FBI agents who had been dispatched to question Evans about Paramount's motivation in frivolously depicting the agency's work.
Watch your step.
Evans was bewildered. He explained that the president's analyst was a comedy. In the coming weeks, Evans came to understand the impact of their visit. His phones were now tapped. His home was watched. The Hoover agency, he learned, did not have a sense of humor.
People of influence would call him and threaten him, and he would go right back at them and say, "Don't be so quick to criticize because I know this and I know that."
Evans mentioned in one of his books that after decades of having his phones bugged by the FBI, I hope what they heard made their faces as red as their necks.
Rather a complicated security problem.
Flicker's film faded into obscurity, and he could not get work.
Things got very tough. I lost my house. It was my time in Siberia. My agent stopped calling me.
My orders are to kill you.
I picked on the wrong guy by accident, you know?
It wasn't so much the loss of income that was killing Ted. It was the loss of the ability to keep on being creative that was really the toughest thing for him. Ted could have created a body of work that would have been absolutely amazing, but he could not suffer fools. And God knows Hollywood was filled with fools.
I have friends who are enormously successful in Hollywood. And all of them understood the politics. And they kept saying to me, "Stop doing this." And it was, I suppose, some arrogant self-destruction that I was involved in, but it worked because I self-destructed.
Take that, you hostile son of a...
I never learned how to behave properly, and I paid a terrific price for it. I just didn't know how to behave better to protect my picture. The work is everything. My picture disappeared. I didn't get the opportunity to make all the other pictures I wanted to make. I would have loved going on with what I really knew how to do, which was to make satirical pictures. I've never stopped making art. Sometimes the art was writing, sometimes it was making a movie, sometimes it was making a television show, sometimes it was writing books. The process of making art is intensely fulfilling. I had started writing what I thought was going to be a satirical book. And I stopped and I said, wait, before I start another book, I've always wanted to learn about sculpture. I'll go get somebody to teach me a little bit about that. That'll be fun. We went to the art supply store and we got clay and tools and a sculpture table and came back here, and he handed me a plaster head of a piece he had done. He said, "Copy this, I'll see you Friday." He came every Friday for the next 36 weeks. And I learned to sculpt. I get up every morning and I sculpt. I can't stop.
Within weeks, Ted was a sculptor, and it's like that's what he was always supposed to do, and it's like there's no, it's like all the tension is gone. There's excitement, but it's not the heart-stopping kind, like, oh my God, what's going to happen to us now?
I do love doing naked women. Some people in the art game call them nudes, but they're naked women, and it's great fun to do.
Now I see the sensual Flicker. A lot of them are erotic.
I like reaching for the soul of the person.
Ted went to representational stuff, which can be the toughest, and he just threw himself into it. Who knew?
Working with that warm, soft, pliable clay to just make a sweeping movement, it's sensual. And hopefully when the sculpture is finished, that's how it will affect the viewer. It's very sensual. I had some friends who were restoring the last house Frank Lloyd built in his life, private home, prior to his doing the Guggenheim, after which he died. It's called Tirana, and it's in New Canaan, Connecticut. They had the great good fortune to find the architect who had been Frank Lloyd Wright's assistant. And they were here visiting, and they saw what we call the five ladies, the five nude figures that I posed inside of geometric forms. She turned around to me and stamped her foot and had even tears in her eyes and said, Ted Flicker, are you still not selling your work? I said, well, no, but if somebody I liked wanted one. She said, well, I do. And I said, which one? She said, all of them. They're going to be the sculpture garden at Tirana. So I made a set for her and shipped them to Connecticut, and they're there. Tell you what an honor it is to have my name connected to Frank Lloyd Wright. That's the look. That's the look I want. This piece is going to be called Olympia. Olympia, being a courtesan, has her choice of men and whether she will or whether she won't. Will she? Won't she? Who? I like this piece. And I'll tell you another thing that's fun about sculpture. I never have to show it to some schmuck from the studio. I got sculpture. I got sculpture, and I got to do it here in Santa Fe. And it's the most incredible third act I could have hoped for. It's the most profoundly satisfying creative thing I've ever done. You know, if I were still making pictures and I financed the picture with my own money and I wrote the script and I was producing and directing it, I still wouldn't be the boss. I don't think I ever really was meant for collaborative art, which is bizarre because my whole career started with the most primal collaborative art, improvising. I am a content man. Look at me very closely. That's the face of a deeply satisfied man.
Thank you, Ted Flicker.
Thank you, Lou Wagner.
What's Ted's legacy? I think it depends on who you ask. For anybody that's ever done improvisational theater, it was that. I think he changed comedy with Barney Miller. I think he shook up a lot of people with President's Analyst. I think his legacy is just knowing him. I think he enriched a lot of lives.